A lone rancher adopted a poor Apache girl. She turned out to be a fugitive widow's daughter. Jacob had always lived a quiet life on his ranch in the wide-open plains of Arizona. His days were filled with the rhythm of the land, the soft lowing of cattle, the creaking of gates, and the endless horizon stretching under the hot sun. Most people in the nearby town called him solitary, and he didn't mind. Jacob liked the calm and the steady work that kept his mind focused. Life was simple, predictable, and safe, or at least that's how it had always been. It was on one of those ordinary afternoons that everything began to change. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow across the dry creek beds and dusty trails. Jacob was riding along one of his usual paths, checking the fences and counting the cattle. He liked these rides alone, letting his horse move at its own pace while his mind wandered. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and earth, and birds called from the sparse trees that dotted the land. It felt peaceful, almost timeless. But then he heard it, a faint, trembling sound that made him freeze in his saddle. At first he thought it might be the wind playing tricks, rustling through the rocks. Then he heard it again, a soft cry, almost like a whisper of someone in distress. It was quiet but urgent, filled with fear. Jacob's heart quickened. He had grown up on this land and knew it well, and there weren't many people wandering alone out here. Whoever, or whatever it was, needed help. He urged his horse forward cautiously, following the sound. The cries led him to a rocky outcrop near the creek, a small formation of stones where shadows stretched long in the late afternoon sun. Peering between the rocks, he spotted her. A small girl, no more than 8 or 9, with dark hair tangled and eyes wide with fear. She was huddled against a rock, her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to disappear entirely. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and her feet were bare. Jacob could see that she was starving, weak, and clearly alone. "Hey there," Jacob said gently, keeping his voice calm so as not to scare her further. "It's all right, you don't have to be afraid." The girl flinched at his voice, shrinking back against the rock. Her eyes were wary, scanning him as though he might vanish at any moment. Jacob knew that look. He had seen it before in animals that had been hurt or abandoned. Fear came first, trust came slowly. He dismounted carefully, keeping his hands visible, and knelt a few feet away, giving her space. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. "My name's Jacob." "What's yours?" The girl hesitated, her lips pressed together, and after a long pause, she whispered, "Little Star." Jacob nodded. Little Star. A strange, beautiful name, he thought. It suited her somehow, small, bright, and alone, like a flicker of light in the darkness. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of jerky and some water. "Here," he said, "you must be hungry." She hesitated again, eyeing the food, but too cautious to take it. Jacob didn't push. He simply waited, speaking in soft tones, telling her about the ranch, the animals, and the wide land that stretched beyond the hills. Slowly, ever so slowly, she edged forward and took the jerky. She drank some water, her hands shaking slightly. Jacob watched her carefully, relief and concern mingling in his chest. She was clearly a survivor, but she needed care, and fast. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Little Star stayed on the horse with him, holding tightly to his arm. Her head rested against his side, and for the first time, Jacob felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't expected. He thought about the harsh world she had survived so far and wondered what circumstances had brought such a small child into the desert alone. At the ranch, Jacob guided her into the modest home he had built years before. It wasn't much, but it was safe, warm, and filled with the smells of the land he loved. He showed her a bed with clean blankets, something he hadn't realized he had prepared for a moment just like this. She hesitated at the door, glancing around the room as if expecting it to vanish, but Jacob simply smiled and said, "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." Over the next few hours, Jacob gave her a proper meal, stewed beans, fresh bread, and a little milk. Little Star ate slowly at first, still wary, but soon she was hungrily finishing her plate. Jacob watched quietly, marveling at how such a small person could seem both fragile and incredibly strong at the same time. As night fell, the desert cooled and the stars appeared, stretching across the sky in a glittering display. Jacob sat with Little Star by the fire, listening to the wind and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. She told him little about where she came from, only that she had been alone for a very long time. Jacob didn't press her. He knew trust had to grow naturally. Over the next few days, Jacob introduced her to the routines of ranch life. He showed her how to care for the animals, how to feed the chickens, and how to help with the cattle. She was eager to learn, and her small hands proved quick and nimble. Despite her fear, she showed courage beyond her years. Jacob admired her quiet determination, yet even as he began to feel hope, there was a shadow hanging over them. Jacob knew that a girl alone in the desert didn't appear out of nowhere. Someone somewhere might be looking for her. He made sure the doors were locked at night and kept a careful eye on the horizon. Little Star sometimes asked about her family, but each time she did, her eyes filled with sadness, and she would change the subject. Jacob could sense the weight of her past pressing on her, even though he didn't yet know the full story. In those first days, Jacob realized that this encounter had changed him as much as it had changed her. The ranch, which had always been his solitary sanctuary, now felt alive with purpose. He had someone to care for, someone to protect, and in return, he was beginning to see a spark of trust and affection in Little Star. She had survived the harshest parts of life already, and yet here she was, slowly allowing herself to hope again. Jacob didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know where Little Star had come from or what dangers might follow. But in that quiet desert, under the vast sky, a bond was forming, fragile, uncertain, but real. And for the first time in many years, Jacob felt that maybe, just maybe, life had more in store than the lonely routine he had always known. As the fire crackled that first night, Little Star curled up under a warm blanket, her small hand brushing against Jacob's as he stoked the flames. Both were silent, yet both understood something unspoken, that this was the beginning of a journey neither could have anticipated, a journey that would test courage, trust, and the meaning of family. And in that moment, the desert seemed less lonely, the horizon less endless, and the night full of a quiet promise that change, perhaps even a little magic, had arrived at Jacob's doorstep in the form of a small, frightened Apache girl named Little Star. Life on the ranch slowly settled into a new rhythm after Little Star arrived. The mornings were filled with the gentle lowing of cattle and the soft sounds of Little Star's small feet as she helped Jacob with chores. She learned quickly, showing a natural skill with the animals and a surprising sharpness when it came to noticing small details on the land. Jacob watched her carefully, amazed at how much strength and intelligence could be packed into such a small frame. It was clear she had survived far more hardship than any child should ever face. Jacob began teaching her simple lessons, not just about ranch work, but about reading, writing, and the world beyond the hills. Little Star was eager to learn. Her dark eyes lit up whenever she grasped something new, and her small hands moved quickly as she practiced writing letters in the dirt or on scraps of paper. She had an energy that was quiet but relentless, a determination to grow stronger and smarter each day. Jacob encouraged it, proud of her progress, but also quietly wondering where such drive had come from. The village nearby remained wary. Word spread quickly that Jacob had taken in a strange child, and many people whispered about her origins. Some said she was lost, others speculated about her past, imagining stories that were often cruel or untrue. Jacob ignored the gossip. He had never been one to care about what others thought, especially when it came to protecting someone in need. Still, he noticed that strangers began lingering near the edges of his land, their eyes curious and questioning. He did not know if they were harmless or if they were searching for the girl, but it made him cautious. Little Star, for her part, began opening up more each day. She told Jacob bits and pieces about her life before the desert, the mother she had loved, the small home they had lived in, and the hardships they had faced. She never spoke of danger in detail, but there were moments when her eyes would grow distant, and her small body would tense, as if remembering something terrifying. Jacob never pressed her. He understood that trust took time and that she needed to feel safe before she could share her story fully. One afternoon, while working near the barn, Little Star pointed to a group of birds flying overhead. "Look," she said softly, "they're migrating. Just like we sometimes have to move when it's not safe." Her words were simple, but Jacob felt the weight behind them. Even in her young age, she had experienced a life filled with sudden moves, danger, and uncertainty. She understood survival in ways most adults could not. Jacob felt a deep mixture of sadness and admiration for her. She had endured so much, yet here she was, learning to smile again. Jacob also began to notice her cleverness in small ways around the ranch. She would find the best way to fetch water without spilling it, notice if a fence had begun to weaken, or calm a skittish animal with gentle words. Her instinctive intelligence amazed him. She was no ordinary child, he realized. There was a spark in her that made her both brave and cautious at the same time. He sometimes wondered if she had been forced to grow up too quickly because the world had been unkind to her. Despite the growing trust between them, Jacob remained vigilant. He had spent long nights staring out into the desert, listening to the wind and the occasional howl of a distant coyote, wondering if someone from her past was searching for her. The desert was wide, but it was not empty, and he knew that someone determined could find their way to his ranch. He began to make small preparations, strengthening the doors, keeping the gates locked, and quietly ensuring that no stranger could approach unnoticed. Meanwhile, the girl's curiosity about the world grew. She asked questions about the land, about the animals, and about the people who lived in the nearby village. Jacob answered as honestly as he could, teaching her about honesty, responsibility, and the value of kindness. Little Star listened intently, absorbing every word. She began to understand that there was more to life than survival, that there were people who could be trusted, and that she could belong somewhere. Jacob also noticed that she was slowly changing in her habits. She began to smile more, laugh quietly at the small jokes he made, and even hum to herself while doing chores. He realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of normalcy, a feeling of safety she had never known. He felt proud but also cautious, understanding that happiness could sometimes make one vulnerable, especially for someone with a mysterious past. One day, while exploring a small stream near the edge of the property, Little Star suddenly froze. Her eyes grew wide and she whispered, "Jacob, someone's out there." Jacob moved quickly, scanning the horizon. At first he saw nothing, but then he noticed faint footprints in the dirt leading along the edge of the property. His heart sank slightly. This was the first real sign that her past might be catching up with them. He motioned for Little Star to stay close and led her back to the house, quietly discussing a plan in his mind. That night, as the stars sparkled above, Jacob sat with Little Star near the fire. He decided to tell her a little about courage and trust. "Life isn't always safe," he said gently, "but there are people who will fight for you, who will care for you no matter what. That's what family is." Little Star listened quietly, her small hands clutching a worn blanket. She had never had anyone fight for her before, and Jacob could see the mixture of disbelief and hope in her eyes. The days passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. Jacob found himself teaching her more than survival skills. He was teaching her about friendship, about trust, and about the small joys of life. Little Star, in return, began to show him a courage he had not seen in anyone for many years. She would climb fences to fetch water, help with the animals, and even guide him to small improvements in the ranch, all while carrying a quiet confidence that belied her age. At the same time, Jacob could sense that her past was not far behind. Strangers continued to appear on the outskirts of the village, asking questions about her, and he knew that eventually someone might trace her here. But for now, he focused on the present, on keeping her safe and helping her grow stronger. He told himself that they would face whatever came together, as a team. Little Star also began to show a remarkable ability to read people. She would notice when a neighbor was upset or when an animal was frightened before anyone else did. Jacob realized that her years of hardship had given her insight and empathy beyond her years. She had learned to observe, to anticipate danger, and to respond quickly. These were not skills most children needed, but in her case, they had been essential for survival. One evening, after a long day of chores and lessons, they both sat quietly on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried the soft scent of the desert. Little Star rested her head against Jacob's arm and whispered, "I think I'm safe now." Jacob felt a warmth in his chest that he had not known for years. He knew the road ahead might not always be easy, but for the first time he felt a real connection, a true sense of purpose. This small, fragile girl had entered his life and changed it completely. And though he did not yet know the full story of her past, he felt certain that they would face it together, come what may. From that moment on, the ranch was no longer just a home for Jacob. It had become a sanctuary, a place where a scared little girl could grow, learn, and find trust again. And as he watched her fall asleep that night, tucked safely under blankets he had prepared with care, Jacob realized that life could be unpredictable and sometimes even frightening, but it could also bring unexpected joy, courage, and the beginnings of a family that neither of them had known they needed. The quiet nights, the warm sun, and the wide, open land became their world. A world where trust could grow, courage could flourish, and a small Apache girl named Little Star could begin to heal, one day at a time. And somewhere deep in the desert, Jacob knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test their hearts, reveal hidden truths, and change both their lives forever. Life on the ranch had settled into a careful rhythm, but Jacob could feel a change in the air. Little Star had grown more confident, more comfortable, and yet there were moments when shadows flickered across her small face, moments when she seemed to remember something she had tried to forget. Jacob noticed these flashes, and though he didn't want to worry her, he also knew that her past might not stay hidden forever. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Jacob and Little Star were checking the fences along the far side of the ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth, and the quiet was broken only by the occasional call of a hawk overhead. Little Star had been unusually quiet that morning, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as if she expected someone, or something, to appear. "Is something wrong?" Jacob asked gently, noticing her tension. She shook her head quickly but didn't meet his gaze. "No, just thinking," she whispered. Jacob nodded. He knew better than to press too hard. Some memories, he understood, were dangerous to revisit too soon. Still, he felt a growing curiosity about her past. She had arrived on his ranch out of nowhere, alone and frightened, and yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that suggested a life far different from what she had revealed. Later that day, a traveling merchant appeared near the ranch. He claimed to be selling supplies, but something in his eyes made Jacob uneasy. The man lingered longer than necessary, glancing at Little Star in ways that made Jacob's protective instincts flare. He watched as the merchant spoke softly to Little Star, who listened politely but appeared wary. Something in the exchange did not sit right with Jacob, and though he said nothing at the time, he made a mental note to be vigilant. As the days passed, small inconsistencies in Little Star's story began to emerge. She spoke of a mother she had loved and a home she remembered, but details were vague and sometimes contradictory. Jacob did not confront her directly. He knew that pushing her could drive her away, but he kept his eyes and ears open. He sensed that she was hiding something, not out of malice, but out of fear. One evening, an old Apache man named Elias came to visit. He had once been a friend of Jacob's family and knew the land well. Elias had heard the rumors in the village and came to see for himself. When he saw Little Star, his eyes widened with recognition, and he knelt down beside her. "My child," he said softly, using the old language of their people, "you are far from where you should be." Little Star's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched Jacob's hand tightly. Jacob felt a surge of concern. He did not understand the words fully, but he could tell they carried weight. Elias spoke to Jacob in private, explaining what he knew. Little Star was not simply an orphan. She was the daughter of a woman who had been involved in a dangerous dispute many years before. Her mother had been a widow, falsely accused of a serious crime, and had gone into hiding to protect her child. Jacob listened carefully, absorbing the information. His protective instincts deepened. He realized that the little girl he had found alone was connected to a past filled with danger, deceit, and powerful enemies. Yet he also felt a determination rising within him. He would not allow her to face that past alone. Whatever dangers awaited, they would face them together. In the days that followed, Jacob began to notice subtle signs that someone might be searching for Little Star. Strange tracks appeared near the edge of the property, and a few villagers asked odd questions about the girl's origins. Jacob knew that these were small warning signs, but he could not ignore them. The safety he had worked so hard to create for her was fragile, and he had to be vigilant. Meanwhile, Little Star's behavior also began to shift. She would sometimes pause while working in the fields, staring into the distance as if remembering something important. At night, she would wake from dreams that left her trembling, whispering words Jacob could not understand. He did his best to comfort her, speaking gently and reassuring her that she was safe, but he knew that trust alone could not erase fear entirely. One afternoon, as they were repairing a fence near the creek, Little Star suddenly froze. Her eyes widened and she whispered, "Jacob, over there." He turned to see a group of strangers moving cautiously along the tree line. Jacob's heart sank. He did not recognize them, but the way they moved suggested they were searching for someone. He quickly led Little Star behind a large boulder, keeping them out of sight. "Stay quiet," he whispered, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We will see who they are first." The strangers lingered for a while, speaking in hushed tones before finally moving on. Jacob waited until they were gone, then guided Little Star back to the safety of the ranch. She clung to him tightly, her small body shaking. "Are they going to come back?" she asked in a trembling voice. "They might," Jacob admitted honestly, "but I will protect you. No one will hurt you here." That night, Jacob sat with Little Star by the fire, speaking softly about courage and resilience. He told her stories of people who had faced danger but found strength in trust and loyalty. Little Star listened, her eyes wide and attentive, drawing comfort from his words. Jacob could see that these moments were helping her regain a sense of security, slowly but surely. As the days turned into weeks, Jacob began to uncover more about her past. He learned that her mother had been a respected woman in her community, known for her kindness and strength. But after being falsely accused of a crime she did not commit, she had been forced to flee, taking her daughter with her. The journey had been dangerous, filled with uncertainty, and it explained why Little Star had survived alone in the desert. Jacob felt a mixture of sadness and admiration. The girl had endured so much, yet she remained resilient, intelligent, and kind. He also felt a growing sense of responsibility. He had not only rescued her from immediate danger, but had become her guardian, protector, and family. This was a role he had never anticipated, but he embraced it fully. One evening, while sitting on the porch, Jacob noticed Little Star staring at the horizon. "Jacob," she said softly, "do you think my mother is still out there somewhere?" Jacob took her small hands in his and looked into her eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I promise you this, whatever happens, you are not alone. I will be here and we will face it together." Little Star nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. For the first time, Jacob saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a belief that life could be safe, even after all she had endured. He felt a deep sense of pride and determination. He would do everything in his power to ensure her safety and happiness. However, the quiet peace of the ranch was fragile. Jacob knew that the past had a way of catching up, and that Little Star's life was still filled with unknown dangers. He had to prepare not just for the present, but for the challenges that lay ahead. Every day he observed, protected, and guided her, teaching her not only survival skills but also the strength of courage, trust, and love. Through it all, Little Star continued to grow. She laughed more freely, helped with chores with increasing skill, and even began forming small friendships with neighbors who visited the ranch. Jacob watched with pride, realizing that this small, resilient girl was learning to trust the world again, slowly reclaiming the childhood that had been stolen from her. Yet, despite these moments of happiness, Jacob could not ignore the signs of her past drawing nearer. Shadows lingered at the edges of their lives, reminders that the world outside the ranch was still dangerous. But he also knew that together, they could face whatever came. Little Star had survived incredible hardships, and he had faith that she would continue to endure, growing stronger with each challenge. And so, life on the ranch continued, a mixture of quiet days, small joys, and the ever-present awareness of the past. Jacob and Little Star grew closer with each passing day, bound by trust, care, and an unspoken understanding that they were no longer alone. The girl who had appeared one day, frightened and alone, was slowly becoming a part of his world. And together they were beginning a journey that would test their courage, reveal hidden truths, and ultimately transform both of their lives forever. The days on the ranch grew longer as summer approached. Jacob and Little Star had settled into a steady routine, but an unspoken tension lingered in the air. Little Star had grown more confident, more lively, and yet Jacob could see shadows flicker across her small face whenever someone mentioned family or the outside world. She often gazed toward the distant hills with a mixture of curiosity and fear, as if expecting something or someone to appear. Jacob tried to focus on the present, on teaching her the skills she would need to thrive. He showed her how to care for the animals, mend fences, and even ride the horse across the open plains. She proved to be quick and capable, absorbing lessons with a sharp intelligence and a determination that amazed him. Jacob often thought that she had survived alone in the desert not because of luck, but because of an inner strength that was rare in children her age. Despite her growing confidence, Jacob could tell that little star carried an invisible burden. Sometimes, while helping him gather firewood or tending to the chickens, she would pause and look at the horizon, her eyes distant. Other times, she would flinch at sounds, shadows, or sudden movements. Jacob understood that these reactions were signs of trauma, evidence of the difficult life she had endured before coming to him. He resolved to be patient, to let her heal at her own pace, and to provide her with the safety and love she had never known. One afternoon, a traveler arrived at the ranch. He claimed to be a trader, but his questions about Little Star were careful, precise, and too pointed to be casual curiosity. Jacob sensed immediately that the man knew more than he let on. He thanked the traveler politely, but kept a careful eye on him, watching as the stranger walked along the edge of the property before leaving without buying anything. Jacob could feel a knot of worry in his stomach. Someone was searching for Little Star, and their intentions might not be kind. That night, Jacob sat by the fire with Little Star, speaking gently about courage and resilience. "Life isn't always safe," he said, "but there are people who will fight for you, who will care for you no matter what. That's what family is." Little Star listened quietly, her small hands clutching the blanket he had given her. For the first time, she spoke about her mother in more detail. She told Jacob about the woman she had loved and trusted, who had been forced to flee when danger came. Her voice trembled, but she spoke bravely, revealing glimpses of the life she had lost. Jacob listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that Little Star's mother had been more than a parent. She had been a protector, someone who had made difficult choices to keep her daughter safe. And though that mother was no longer with them, her spirit seemed to live on in Little Star. Jacob felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that he must continue where her mother had left off. He would protect this child, no matter what challenges lay ahead. In the following days, Jacob began to investigate the warnings that had appeared before. He retraced the traveler's steps, spoke to old friends in the village, and quietly observed the movements of strangers near the ranch. His investigation revealed that Little Star's mother had been falsely accused of a serious crime, one that had made powerful people angry and driven her into hiding. The girl's life had been at risk from the moment she was born, and Jacob realized that the danger might not yet be over. Meanwhile, Little Star's awareness of her own story grew. She began asking questions, curious about the people who had pursued her family and the reasons behind the danger she had never fully understood. Jacob answered carefully, giving her as much information as he thought she could handle. He wanted her to understand her past, but he also wanted to shield her from fear and despair. It was a delicate balance, one that he approached with patience and care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob noticed a small group of strangers approaching the ranch. They moved cautiously, scanning the land as if they were searching for something or someone. Jacob's heart tightened. He knew that the time of uncertainty had arrived. He quickly guided Little Star to a safe spot inside the house, out of sight, and watched as the strangers came closer. He could see that they were persistent, moving carefully and speaking in low tones. Jacob felt a surge of protective instinct. He knew that he could not let them reach Little Star. He remained calm, observing their actions and waiting for the right moment to act. He understood that any confrontation could be dangerous, but he also knew that inaction was not an option. After what felt like hours, the strangers eventually left, but Jacob knew this was only temporary. Someone somewhere was actively searching for Little Star, and their intentions might be far from friendly. He explained the situation to her gently, emphasizing the need for vigilance while assuring her that she was safe with him. Little Star listened quietly, her eyes wide but resolute. She had learned from her mother's example, and now from Jacob, that courage often meant facing fear rather than running from it. Over the next few weeks, Jacob and Little Star prepared the ranch for possible threats. They reinforced doors and fences, kept watch at all times, and practiced quiet movements so that they could avoid detection if needed. Little Star, despite her young age, took the preparations seriously, learning not only to protect herself but to anticipate danger. Jacob marveled at her resilience. She had survived alone in the desert, and now she was learning to survive with guidance, intelligence, and courage. At the same time, little Star began to develop a sense of hope for the future. She laughed more freely, helped with chores with increasing skill, and even started exploring the outskirts of the ranch with Jacob's careful supervision. Jacob encouraged her independence while keeping a watchful eye. He wanted her to grow strong, not fearful, and he knew that allowing her small freedoms was an important part of her development. Despite the challenges, their bond deepened. Jacob felt a profound sense of responsibility for little Star, and she, in turn, trusted him more each day. Their relationship was built on shared experience, trust, and an unspoken understanding that they were no longer alone. Together, they faced the uncertainties of the world, drawing strength from each other's presence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, little Star whispered, "Do you think my mother would be proud of me?" Jacob smiled gently, taking her small hands in his. "I don't doubt it for a second," he said. "She would be proud that you are brave, kind, and strong, and she would be proud that you have found someone to protect you when she cannot." Little Star leaned against him, comforted by his words. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that her life could be more than fear and survival. Jacob, too, felt a quiet pride. He had not only rescued a child from immediate danger, but had become her family, her protector, and her guide. As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jacob reflected on how far they had come. The ranch was no longer just a home for him. It was a sanctuary for little Star, a place where she could learn, grow, and begin to heal. The danger from her past was real, but so was the strength they had developed together. Jacob knew that the challenges ahead would be difficult. The strangers searching for little Star were persistent, and her mother's story was far from over. But he also knew that together, they could face whatever came. Little Star had endured more than most children ever would, and with guidance, love, and courage, she could continue to grow into the person she was meant to be. That night, as the desert cooled and the stars shone above, Jacob and little Star sat quietly by the fire. They did not need words to understand the bond they shared. It was a bond of trust, protection, and love, a bond forged through hardship and strengthened by shared courage. And though the road ahead was uncertain, both of them felt ready to face it together. In the days that followed, Jacob continued to teach little Star not only survival skills, but also lessons about life, courage, and hope. He encouraged her to ask questions, to explore, and to dream. Little Star, in turn, absorbed everything with keen attention, her eyes bright with curiosity and determination. She began to see the world as a place where she could belong, not just survive, and Jacob took pride in watching her grow. Even as the danger from the past loomed nearby, Jacob felt a quiet confidence. Little Star was no longer a frightened child alone in the desert. She was strong, intelligent, and resilient, and together they would face whatever challenges came. The ranch had become more than a home. It was a place of learning, healing, and preparation for the trials that awaited. And so life continued on the ranch, a mixture of routine and preparation, joy and vigilance. Jacob and little Star faced each day with courage, drawing strength from each other and from the quiet beauty of the desert. They knew that the past could not be ignored, but they also knew that together, they could shape a future filled with hope, safety, and the beginnings of a true family. The ranch had grown quiet in the early morning, the desert stretching endlessly under the soft pink and orange. Glow of sunrise. Jacob was up early, checking the fences, while little Star helped gather the chickens. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of calm, but Jacob knew it was only temporary. His instincts had never been wrong, and he had a feeling that the past was about to catch up with them. It happened sooner than he expected. That afternoon, as the sun reached its peak, a distant sound carried across the plains, a faint but deliberate movement among the trees at the edge of the property. Jacob froze, scanning the horizon. He could see a group of figures moving cautiously, their intentions clear even from a distance. These were no ordinary travelers. They were looking for something or someone, and Jacob knew immediately who it was. He quickly guided little Star behind the barn, keeping her low and out of sight. Her small hands gripped his shirt, and her wide eyes looked to him for guidance. "Jacob, are they going too?" she whispered, fear and curiosity mingling in her voice. "They're searching for you," he said quietly, his voice steady. "But don't worry, we'll handle this together. Just stay behind me and stay quiet." The strangers moved carefully, scanning the property. They spoke in low tones, clearly coordinating their search. Jacob recognized them as part of the group he had suspected was connected to Little Star's past. People who had been seeking her mother and now, inevitably, her as well. He had prepared for this day, reinforcing the doors and setting up the perimeter, but the moment still carried a weight of danger. As the group drew closer, Jacob's mind raced. He needed to protect Little Star, but he also wanted to uncover the truth behind her mother's story. He had pieced together fragments from villagers, travelers, and old friends, but he still lacked confirmation. Who were these people exactly, and what did they want from Little Star? The confrontation began quietly. The strangers approached the main gate, calling out softly, asking if anyone had seen a girl matching Little Star's description. Jacob remained calm, standing near the barn, keeping Little Star hidden. He knew he had to think strategically. One wrong move could endanger them both. Suddenly, Little Star's voice broke through the tension. "Jacob, they know me," she whispered. Her voice trembled, and Jacob could feel the fear radiating from her small body. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said firmly. "Stay behind me. We will face this together." The strangers stopped and looked toward the barn. Jacob stepped forward, raising his hands slightly in a peaceful gesture. "She is under my protection," he said, his voice calm but strong. "No one will harm her while she is here." There was a long pause. Then one of the strangers, an older man with weary eyes, stepped forward. His voice was softer than the others, carrying a tone of sorrow rather than anger. "Jacob, we are not here to harm her," he said. "We only seek the truth about her mother and the injustice that was done." Jacob studied the man carefully. There was a weight in his words that suggested honesty. He motioned for Little Star to stay behind him, but allowed himself to relax slightly. "Then speak your truth," he said, "but I will not allow anyone to frighten her." The older man nodded and began to tell a story Jacob had only glimpsed in fragments until now. Little Star's mother had been a widow, a woman known for her kindness and strength, who had been falsely accused of theft and deceit by a powerful family who wanted control of her land. She had fled to protect her daughter, moving constantly to avoid capture. The girl had survived in the desert through courage, intelligence, and the love of her mother. Little Star listened, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, she began to understand the full weight of her past. Her mother had been brave, clever, and loving, and she had sacrificed everything to keep her daughter safe. Jacob's heart ached for her, knowing how much fear and uncertainty she had endured, but he also felt a sense of pride. Little Star had inherited her mother's courage and resilience. The older man continued, explaining that the pursuit had not been entirely malicious. Some members of the powerful family had realized the truth too late, and now they only sought to correct the mistakes of the past. Their intentions were to acknowledge the injustice and ensure that Little Star and her mother's legacy were recognized. Jacob could see the sincerity in their eyes, but he remained cautious. Trust could not be given lightly, especially when the stakes were so high. Little Star stepped forward slowly, her small hand clutching Jacob's. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Was my mother really innocent?" The older man nodded, tears glimmering in his eyes. "Yes, child, she was innocent. You survived because she loved you and fought for you, and now it is time for the truth to be known." Jacob felt a mixture of relief and determination. The danger had not vanished completely, but the revelation of the truth changed everything. Little Star's past, which had been filled with fear and uncertainty, was finally being acknowledged. He could see the transformation in her eyes, a mixture of sorrow, pride, and hope. The strangers stayed for a while, helping Jacob and Little Star piece together the final details of her mother's story. They showed him letters, documents, and small belongings that had been preserved over the years, each one confirming the courage and integrity of the woman who had risked everything to protect her daughter. Little Star held these items gently, as if touching her mother through them, her heart swelling with pride and grief. Jacob watched her closely, understanding the depth of her emotions. He realized that her journey was far from over, but she had survived the most difficult part, understanding the truth and reclaiming her mother's legacy. The girl who had been alone in the desert, frightened and wary, was now standing tall, filled with the strength of her mother's spirit and the love Jacob had given her. As the day drew to a close, the older man and his companions prepared to leave. They had completed their mission, to reveal the truth, acknowledge the past, and ensure that Little Star's name was cleared. Jacob stood with Little Star, watching as the strangers disappeared into the horizon, their figures growing smaller against the vast desert landscape. Little Star turned to Jacob, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and smiles. "Jacob, I think I'm ready now," she said softly, "ready to live without fear." Jacob hugged her tightly, feeling a surge of emotion. "You've always been ready, Little Star," he said. "You just didn't know it yet, and now we can face the future together." The ranch, once a place of quiet routine, had transformed into a sanctuary of healing, courage, and newfound truth. Little Star had learned about her mother, her past, and the strength she had inherited. Jacob had not only protected her, but had helped her reclaim her story, giving her a foundation to grow stronger and more confident. That night, under the wide expanse of desert sky, Jacob and Little Star sat quietly by the fire. The stars sparkled above, reflecting the journey they had shared, the fear, the courage, and now the truth. They did not need words to understand the bond they shared. It was a bond built on trust, protection, and love, one that had been forged through hardship and strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Little Star felt a sense of peace she had never known. The fear that had shadowed her life was finally giving way to hope. She understood her mother's sacrifices, the courage that had kept her alive, and the love that surrounded her now. Jacob, too, felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had helped guide her through the most challenging moments of her life. The revelation of the truth was not just a moment of closure, it was a turning point. Little Star had survived, learned, and grown stronger, ready to embrace the life she deserved. Jacob had become more than a guardian. He had become family, a steady presence in a world that had often been cruel and uncertain. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Jacob and Little Star sat side by side, looking toward the horizon. The past had been revealed, the danger had been confronted, and the truth had brought with it a new beginning. Together, they had faced fear, uncovered secrets, and discovered the power of courage, trust, and love. And in that quiet desert night, under the endless sky, they both knew that their journey was far from over, but that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before. The days that followed the revelation of the truth were unlike any Jacob or Little Star had experienced before. The weight of uncertainty that had hung over the ranch lifted slowly, replaced by a sense of peace and possibility. Little Star moved with a confidence that had never been seen before. She still helped with the chores, still tended to the animals, and still explored the wide plains, but now there was a sparkle in her eyes, a quiet joy born of knowing the full story of her past and the strength she carried from her mother. Jacob watched her with a mixture of pride and relief. The little girl who had appeared one day, frightened and alone beneath a rock, was now thriving. She laughed more freely, spoke with certainty, and began to dream about the future rather than merely surviving the present. Jacob felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come to the desert seeking a simple life of routine, yet he had found something far more profound: family. One morning, as the sun rose in golden streaks across the plains, Little Star approached Jacob while he worked near the barn. "Jacob," she said softly, "can we go see the village today? I want to show them that I'm not the same scared girl they thought I was." Jacob smiled warmly. "Of course," he said, "but we'll go slowly. You need to feel ready for everyone to see the new you." The trip to the village was a quiet adventure. Little Star walked confidently beside Jacob, her head held high. Villagers greeted her with curiosity at first, but as they saw the strength and confidence in her eyes, their expressions softened. She no longer seemed like a lost child. They could see that she had grown into someone brave, resilient, and remarkable. Jacob noticed the change too. He had always known she was special, but now the entire village could see it. Little Star also began to ask questions about her mother, wanting to understand more about the woman who had given her life so much courage. Jacob shared stories he had learned from the older man who had revealed the truth, tales of bravery, kindness, and cleverness. Little Star listened intently, absorbing every detail. She felt closer to her mother than ever before, connected not just by blood, but by the courage and spirit that had been passed down to her. As the days turned into weeks, the ranch became more than a place of safety. It became a home in every sense of the word. Jacob and Little Star worked together to improve the property, planting a small garden, repairing fences, and caring for the animals. Little Star's laughter filled the air, mingling with the sounds of the desert, and Jacob found himself smiling more than he had in years. The bond they shared had grown deeper, stronger, and unbreakable. One afternoon, while exploring the hills near the ranch, Little Star discovered a small, hidden spring. Water bubbled gently over smooth stones, and the sunlight reflected in sparkling patterns across the clear surface. She knelt beside it, cupping the water in her hands and drinking deeply. "Jacob," she said, "it's beautiful here. It feels like a new beginning." Jacob nodded, watching her with pride. "It is a new beginning," he said, "for both of us. You've come so far, and now the world is yours to explore, to grow, and to enjoy. You're not just surviving anymore, you're living." That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Jacob and Little Star sat on the porch together. They watched the horizon, listening to the quiet hum of the desert. Little Star leaned against him, feeling safe and cherished in a way she never had before. Jacob realized that this moment, simple as it was, represented everything he had worked for: the safety, the love, and the family they had become. Over time, Little Star began to form bonds with the other children in the village. She played and laughed freely, no longer the timid, scared girl she had been. Villagers who had once whispered about her now admired her courage and intelligence. Jacob saw her teaching younger children how to care for animals, showing them patience and care. He felt a deep pride, knowing that she was not only healing but also sharing the lessons of strength and kindness she had learned. One day, as they tended to the cattle together, Little Star turned to Jacob with a serious expression. "Jacob," she said, "I think I want to learn more about the world beyond the ranch, about people, about stories, about life." Jacob smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll learn together," he said. "The world is big, but we'll face it step by step, side by side. You've already proven how brave and strong you are. Now it's time to grow even more." As the seasons changed, so did their lives. The garden flourished, the animals thrived, and the ranch became a place of warmth and laughter. Little Star continued to grow in confidence, intelligence, and compassion. Jacob watched her transform from a frightened child into a young girl filled with hope, curiosity, and resilience. She had reclaimed her past, embraced her present, and was ready to shape her future. Jacob, too, had changed. The quiet life he had once sought seemed simple compared to the richness of his days with Little Star. He had found purpose, connection, and joy in ways he had never imagined. Together they had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and they had emerged stronger, united, and full of hope. One evening, as the stars began to shine in the darkening sky, Little Star sat quietly beside Jacob, gazing upward. "Do you think my mother would be happy with me?" she asked softly. Jacob looked down at her, his heart full. "I don't doubt it for a moment," he said. "She would be proud of your courage, your kindness, and your strength. Most of all, she would be proud that you have found a place where you belong." Little Star smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart she had never known before. For the first time in her life, she felt complete. The fears that had haunted her, the shadows of the past, and the loneliness she had endured, all of it was finally behind her. She was safe, loved, and free to live her life fully. The ranch, once a quiet and solitary place, had transformed into a home filled with love, laughter, and purpose. Jacob and Little Star had faced challenges together, uncovered hidden truths, and discovered the power of family, trust, and resilience. The bond they shared was unbreakable, forged through hardship and strengthened by love. In the years that followed, Little Star continued to grow, learning about the world around her while cherishing the lessons she had learned on the ranch. Jacob remained by her side, guiding her, protecting her, and sharing in the joys of her successes. Together, they faced each day with courage, curiosity, and the quiet certainty that they could overcome any challenge. The desert, once a place of uncertainty and danger for Little Star, became a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Its wide-open spaces reminded her of freedom, its sunsets of beauty, and its quiet nights of peace. Jacob and Little Star had built a life together, one filled with love, trust, and the knowledge that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky, the ranch stood as a testament to courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a lone rancher and the small Apache girl who had come into his life. Their story, once filled with fear and uncertainty, had blossomed into one of hope, healing, and family. Little Star had discovered the truth of her past, embraced her present, and stepped boldly into a future full of possibilities. Jacob looked at her, a quiet smile on his face. "We've come a long way," he said softly. Little Star nodded, her eyes shining. "And the best is still ahead," she replied. Together they sat in the warm glow of the desert evening, the wind rustling through the grasses, the stars twinkling above, and a sense of peace settling over the land. Their journey had been difficult, full of challenges and mysteries, but it had led them here, to a place of safety, love, and new beginnings. And as the night deepened, Jacob and Little Star knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger and braver than ever before. The ranch, the desert, and the wide-open sky had become more than a home. They were symbols of the life they had built together, a life filled with courage, hope, and the knowledge that family is not only about blood, but about love, trust, and the willingness to protect and care for one another, no matter the circumstances. And in that quiet desert night, under a sky full of stars, Jacob and Little Star embraced their future, ready for all the adventures, joys, and discoveries that lay ahead, together.